Hi there, and thank you for clicking on my video. This is going to be more of a free-form rant, if you will. Um, Sort of inspired by a commenter, Spot, with three T's, Spot6. They said at least Cobra and Crane is solid. People just don't realize that it has a stance that force proc slash, so everyone calls it trash. And I completely agree. But it's also not just that. There haven't been any releases recently where the build or the weapon or the frame associated with it is absolute garbage. Yoreli had issues, but Steinax was good. Baruch Prime is good because Baruch was good. But there just haven't been any weapons where in Warframe, for any of you that actually come across this video that don't know what Warframe is, the jargon for calling something garbage basically is MR fodder. That's the term that we use. It's accurate. Um, but personally to me, there's never really anything that's MR fodder. You just have stuff that's no longer relevant. Like, can anybody really make the argument that at one point in time, the Mark 1 Bratton wasn't meta in your build? If you are MR0 or MR1, you were either using the Mark 1 Bratton or the Mark 1 Paris. It was the meta at an MR rank. So even though the weapon has some troubles now, you can still, if you know what you're doing, boost the damage on it. Right? I think Dystopia, I think it was Dystopia, did a level cap with the Mark 1 Bratton against Corpus units using Toxic Lash and Roar, or Expedited Suffering, one of those two. So the idea that any weapon is just absolute garbage is ludicrous. It was part of the reason why the meme existed of doing level cap with Mark 1 Bratton. Is that you take something that's considered absolute rubbish and do a level cap with it. Literally the toughest enemy. And you can do the same, maybe not against Grenier effectively, but you can do it with, like, say, the Mark 1 Bratton or the Stug. Like, there's no reason why you can't. It's just a more difficult build path. But it can be done. So the new release, specifically talking about the Cobra and Crane, right? It's a status scaling weapon. Everybody wants to see crit damage focus builds. Listen, these are just as effective in their own way, but you have to know how to build it. Like, you would still build attack speed, but a roar build would blow up their damage super fast. Right? Like, there's ways to get it to work. But it's just not considered meta. But it has its own way of building and thinking. So my issue with this is when there are newer players, and this is speaking, I'm not going to list any names. But I made a video about, like, the glaive, right? And how specific things are considered meta, and more importantly, how it's talked about in such high regard that people are willing to spend money on it. I mean, maybe it's a behavioral change that Warframe players have to do. Because obviously there's always going to be a best in slot, right? There's just going to be a weapon or a frame or an ability, like, say, with the helmet system, that just does that little bit extra and outperforms. But the fact is calling new releases trash. They power creep everything. Even in the video where I did the dual Kara's Prime versus the Nami Skyla Prime, there's built-in scaling on it. It's like 3% stronger in slash than the Nami Skyla, which is whatever. but it's still there, right? So the idea of power creep not being prevalent 24/7, there is power creep. There is power creep in every Prime release. But the fact is it might not be power creep aligned with the meta. Okay, it might have alternative scaling. So that doesn't mean that it's garbage. But what I wanted to get to specifically is the fact that my issue isn't with the people that do their own builds. So you have like Warframe creators that do their own custom builds. I have absolutely no issue whatsoever with that. Even if I disagree with their builds, I love people posting their ideas for everybody else to see. Sometimes I look at stuff and I get ideas where I'm like, man, they could have done that better. But I'll still comment like, great job, right? Because they had to give me the idea if it's something I didn't think about. Though to be honest, most of the stuff in the game, it's probably something I forgot. So if they remind me of something and I go, oh, and then there's this other interaction, I might be able to figure out more than them, but it's probably something I forgot. So my issue with this mainly is where you have people that have turned their minds off and are solely trying to play the game based on how somebody else tells you should. It's fucking garbage. I don't know how you can play a game listening exclusively to what somebody said. A lot of the build videos have no explanation, which is something I particularly pride myself on, that I will freeform explain the logic behind it, because I don't need to do better in this circumstance. There are things I need to improve on, but I need people that are listening to me to maybe gain some understanding. So regardless of how common the combo counter build is, I'm still going to explain it every time. Because maybe somebody watching my video for the first time doesn't know what that is. You have to consider, when thinking about whether something's viable or not, or important, is it doesn't depend on my point of view. It depends on somebody who doesn't know. Right? Like, if it's somebody new, the running joke is DE stands for doesn't explain. Right? This game has a hell of a learning curve on it. It's not the worst, but this is a chunky learning curve for a new player. Let's be honest. So explaining alternative builds and a new Prime coming out and people just saying it's trash completely turns off your mind, personally you, and a newer person that doesn't know any better saying, oh, Omega lol, it's trash. It's not trash, it's just you don't like the scaling, is about the most innocent way you can phrase something. Okay, so you don't like the dot build. Okay, that's fine. But wouldn't it be healthier to say something along the lines of, oh, like the Cobra and Kane has a status chance scaling on it, and I'm not really a fan of it. I prefer upfront damage, crit chance focused builds, where I can get more raw damage out of it. Or even then, when I prefer to do stuff, with my helmet interactions and my frame buff, my build style is more oriented around the buffs that I use. It would, at least for somebody who doesn't know any better, explain that there's something going on behind it. But when you drop it all the way down to, oh, it's garbage, a newer player isn't going to know why it's garbage. So, like, you have, like, say, that's why I constantly mention the IPS weighting, and then I specifically mention what it does better against. Okay? Is because each of those, the IPS, impact, puncture, slash, does better against a faction, and I will always say, this weapon will do better raw damage against this faction based on its weighting. Or at least mention it in some way. So even if the weapon is quote-unquote garbage, all that really means is that it's been power crept. So say something along the lines of, oh, this weapon was like the meta a while ago, but due to the scaling that's in the game now, it just doesn't really shine like it used to. Or like some more informed way of saying that instead of, oh, it's garbage, right? I mean, effectively, like, the Brahma at some point in the future will be considered garbage. One change to ammo. One change to ammo. And all of a sudden it's no longer meta? Are you kidding me? Nobody here has an ammo drum augment and a carrier. It does the same shit. It's never changed. But the meta is to not run those, right? So, like, it's just an ammo, and nobody wanted to deal with the ammo. It's you don't even have to run energized munitions from the helmet. All you had to do was run a carrier and an ammo drum, and ta-da, the Brahma's back, right? But nobody wanted to do it. So it's the meta is very, very fickle. If you're new and you don't really know what I'm talking about, it's just the meta is basically defined as meta is most effective tactics available, but it also has to do with the most amount of power with the least amount of work, which has its merits, don't get me wrong. But when an older player that you're learning from or reading the wiki is an amazing resource, but it doesn't explain like the concept and how things work out very well. I see that they're updating like explanations of what mods and what abilities things don't work. I can see that stuff being updated. But the fact is it probably is going to take an older player sitting down and just explaining to you, oh, because this has so much, like, okay, say for example, like strength numbers. Like, I've started doing that because I realized I wasn't. When you need to hit a specific target and listing out, like I did it with Baruch, and good lord, that was a long ass video. Like, oh, if I want to go range for elude, I need to hit this number. If I go distance on lull, I need to hit at least over 30. Reason being is with a lot of enemies, that tends to be the max range of them aggroing by visual sight. And at least 30 for range, because they'll start shooting at you at about 30. Now, generally, they're going to try to get closer, but that sort of shit isn't in the wiki. Like, oh, I want to get like this amount of power strength for Baruch's 3 at a minimum so I can gain 90%, but here's the benefit if I go further. Right? Oh, with reactive storm, I need to be at least this power strength, if not really close, to get 100% status chance on his 4 waves, on his Desert Storm waves. And I made sure to explain that. But if you were to just say Baruch's trash, it's because you don't know how to build him. Okay? Maybe you don't have the mods and it's a modding issue. Well, go farm them is the obvious answer. But building frames is balancing a bunch of stuff. If you can't build something, or you say like, oh, something's trash, it signifies that you don't know how to build, you don't know the frame well enough, and you're trying to throw it away, not because it is garbage, but because its build path and its build set and its scaled sets might be incredibly difficult. Not everything is as easy as Ash, where build for duration, throw a Umbral Intensify on, and the Seeking Shuriken's Augment. Enjoy your level cap. Oh, and make sure to mod for Rolling Guard. There you go. Go do your level cap. The scaling is built in. Like, There's a bunch of conditionals in the game now. It's gonna get tougher to mod and balance, and it's interesting to me. But just when you guys are talking to like newer players specifically, now if it's somebody who's been playing the game for a long time like you, um, obviously you guys are gonna have your own level of lingo, right? Because there's built-in understanding. Um, but like with a newer player, especially, maybe I'm more sensitive to it because of the new players that I deal with. I really have to explain stuff. So when like it's like horrible when somebody goes like, "Oh, something's trash," or like, "Oh, blah blah blah, this is a meta build," and it's like, okay, but why? And like when a new player hears meta, they think I have to get it, or I need to make sure to get this. Like, listen, the Glaive Prime is clearly very strong, and it has an easy build path for power on it. But you could just not farm the Glaive Prime and still do endgame content. Like, it's not, you have to have this. It's not World of Warcraft where, like, you need a specific set. Okay. Like, that's one of the great things about it is, like, I can take this frame and I built a second one. So this isn't the same one as the green and the white one, if you guys were wondering. This is another Baruch Prime I built. Um, for range build. This is a support build. It's got a 280% range on it and rest and rage on it. And it does just fine. Everything's asleep and it's got a 50% vulnerability bonus to it. So the fact is that build paths are subjective. Whether a weapon, the worst thing you can say about a weapon is that it just got power crept. Like, say the Mark 1 Bratton isn't meta for late game content. Well, of course not. It's not designed for that. When you talk about weapons in terms of like how good they are, just consider mentioning what its actual strength is. Like the Cobra and Crane does incredibly well against Corpus, but make sure to note when you say it that it has trouble with proto shields, right? But every toxin weapon, surprise, has trouble with proto shields. So the fact is that like maybe we need to chill a little bit on the calling weapons trash, because the fact is there's too many people in Warframe that won't be able to discern why something is trash. Um, so just saying something is like, I know they were joking, but somebody in the comment section with meme in their name, God bless them. I love their picture too. When I did the Afurus Prime modding and scalings, um, just basically said big puncture equals bad. But if you do a raw damage build against Grineer and scale your weapon appropriately, you want puncture. You don't want it for the status, but you want puncture for a raw damage build against Grineer. Like, that would be the counter. You would want as much puncture as possible. Not only that, you would want slash off of it also, if you're trying to do a raw damage build against Grineer. And you wanted to, you weren't stripping, but you were doing like a corrosive build, puncture is completely welcomed in that setup. So something like that, like it depends, and there's nuance to it, but you just have to know how to build it, right? Like you have to know what you need to do to bring out the best in the weapon. But yeah, like stop calling stuff trash. The issue isn't the people making the meta. The issue is the people that turn their minds off and follow that person. And then when somebody asks the follower, they just, without explanation, because they may or may not understand what it is, just tell the person something's trash. That's not helpful. It in no way, shape, or form is it helpful, because the person who came up with the build could explain it and what the merits are to it, but the follower can't. They can only understand as much as they understand from the builder, and then they can figure it out themselves. But if they don't do that, and a lot of people don't, it's just damaging to the new person. And I think that sort of understanding would help Warframe as a whole. Breaking down where something excels, at least mentioning it. Like, oh, this weapon, like the Cobra and Crane, is really good against Corpus, but it's bad against Grineer because of its damage type. It's heavy on impact, so this is going to give you better raw damage against Corpus units. Just passing mention, this brand new weapon excels in this instance, would be super helpful. Because the Cobra and Crane is a strong weapon against the Corpus, because it doesn't have the crit to carry over into more generalized builds. Like, when you start getting into heavier status, it becomes more specialized. It's a much more nuanced thing. Not by a ton, but crit allows you to just mod for whatever the hell you want and make the weighting heavy enough that you can just smash stuff with it. But if you have to go status, it means you have to excel against a specific thing. Right? So, just small rant, no real hot takes. This is pretty lukewarm. It's a more knowledgeable build path, but there's still damage against it. Like, say for example, like, okay, people are like, what the hell are you talking about? Can anybody tell me that the Convectrix isn't able to level cap? And it's a status weapon. It gets its damage from multiple procs. That's its scaling. Multiple slash ticks proc per time. And enough multi-shot to then multiply the number of slash ticks that you're getting again. And it does hella damage. Those 500Ks, 600Ks, millions, 2 millions that you're seeing are from a ton of slash ticks stacked on top of each other. That's what's making the number so high. It's not a single slash tick giving you 1 million. It's 40 slash ticks giving you 1 million. Or probably less than that. Probably like 10 or 12. It does pretty good damage on its own. So, it's different scaling. That's what the Cobra and Crane scaling is. It needs attack speed. It needs a bit of crit damage. But it needs a shit ton of status. So when you hit something, it's proccing a shit ton of toxin each time. And it's not going to be like a slash weapon where you can dive completely into a crit build. And it's not going to have a force toxin proc on it. Right? You have to RNG it, so building attack speed is incredibly beneficial. Though personally, I like the double crit damage build. But there's merit to running like Organ Shatter, Berserker, Gladiator, Vice on it, and Arcane Strike. Because that's how you're getting your increase, right? So, it's different. And even with Baruch, where it has its unique passive on it, with Baruch, where it gives the I think it's like a 1 second stun, 2 second stun. It's not super long, but it's definitely there. That's the perfect time to blow something up. 2 seconds of free autos on something is a ton of status on it. So it's something I'm kind of tired of seeing. Trash. It's a smooth brain comment. Like, just say it's not meta, or where it excels isn't current content. Just find another way to say it, because it's just, I mean, what am I going to say? Oh, your opinion is trash? Like, there's no comeback to it, right? You know, if you're going to play a comment that's, you know, in the pig pen, like, I'm not going to get dirty fighting you, right? Like, there's nuance to all this. Like, everything is level capable. I mean, it was proven, right? The last great meme was the Stug and the Mark I Bratton. So everything can be level capped, and we know that. So, it is what it is. I just wanted to make this small rant, and I'll cap it here. But it's something that's been bothering me a bit. Because as soon as somebody says something is trash, it's not informative. It doesn't explain why. It doesn't, like, I'm not going to say respect the weapon, but it prevents people from looking at the weapon and giving it its due. And every weapon has its strength. the most you can say about it is that something else does it better nowadays. But that doesn't make it make it trash. Like the Ether Reaper, slash based. It's like what, MR4 or something like that. It's a cheap ass weapon. Does its job incredibly well against lower tier content. But you would still say it's trash compared to the Reaper Prime. Because that weapon does the same thing the Ether Reaper does, but better. You know what I'm saying? But if you're MR4, an Ether Reaper is an incredibly effective anti-Grineer weapon. Though, to be honest, at the lower tiers, running a corrosive build with heat or a corrosive build with puncture with a little bit of crit will get you through every Grineer mission on the star chart. You know what I'm saying? Just for the occasional boss mod for radiation or whatever. Just figure out what its weakness is and mod for that. But corrosive puncture against Grineer, if you're low level, is a great source of damage. So when you call something trash, it causes people who don't know any better, and maybe you're younger. Now that's an issue. Now that crossplay is out, the average age of the pool of people you play with has gone down. Just due to the nature of the age of people on consoles as an average. So maybe it's a little bit different. The PC population was a bit older, just due to the nature of people who use PCs. Is obviously there's a breadth of people, but the average of people, age of people using PCs, you got to be able to type. So it's not going to be like a 6-year-old that can hold a controller, right? Like you got like 10, 12, and 13-year-olds that can clearly use a console and clearly use a PC. It's not an issue. But the average age of those people and their ability to differentiate and establish these connections is going to be significantly lower on a 10 to 12-year-old as opposed to a 30-year-old. So calling something trash if you're a more experienced player and they're younger, both in-game and in real life, might just cause them to quit thinking about the weapon and not learn something. And if anything, it makes them more dependent on a builder's decision and direction to him. It just makes them more dependent on that person. They're not learning anything, and though I would say 100%, I don't get the vibe from anybody in the Warframe community that they would try to like manipulate this. But like there is sort of a dependency that can develop between somebody that makes build videos and doesn't explain it. If the build is super effective and they don't explain how it works, and somebody new comes across that channel that's a little too young to be able to establish how good something is, they might just want the damage, but they won't understand where it's coming from. Maybe they'll make like a shallow observation, like, oh, they went corrosive against Grineer, right? Like that's a Grineer weakness, but they won't understand the other scaling on it. Because I saw a bunch of that with Alternox builds, where there was no explanation of why they went that specific element, why you would go like gas electric, or they went just like pure corrosive and just ran into steel path. But it's like a 6 forma build and it doesn't explain it. So anyway, rant over, long enough. Wasn't really structured, but I really wanted it to be just like what I was thinking. But nobody said anything other than Spot mentioning it. But I have seen stuff in like say Twitch channels where people are literally calling the weapon trash. And it's like, what the hell's the point of that? Like, okay, maybe you're 28, MR28, MR29, and you have like 2,000 hours in the game. Right? I mean, to be honest, if you have 2,000 hours in the game, you're probably legend rank or higher, I would hope. But just saying it's trash and having people associated with a streamer, you got to remember that there's like younger people watching that are new to the game, especially when they're trying to get like build advice and they're like MR5, MR6. You got to remember that there are people that don't know better. So maybe it's just like a language. I don't know. I don't expect the language to change, but like honestly, ideally something nice and simple that I'd like to see would be like, oh, that weapon got power crept on, or oh, that weapon has a really specific uh, enemy that it's good at fighting against, but it has been power crept on. Just something like that to add some nuance instead of saying it's trash. Because you got to remember, there's like teenagers that play this game and they don't really. I think the tree behind me just reset. Okay. Um, and you got to remember that they aren't gonna know better. So it's just because of the clan and the alliance and the fact that I interact with new people so much, it is sort of a pet peeve of mine to not use that. And I guess I'm just kind of like voicing it because it's just if you understand the game, the hell's there to do in this? You've probably done a level cap one time. Like I'm not a big level cap runner, but if somebody's like, "Oh, pick up and let's go do a level cap," or let's do like a disruption for an hour or a survival for 3, like I have those builds. It's not an issue. Or I have a frame that I want to try out and I can come up with the build on the spot for it. It's not that hard. So the level 10k meme, I think it's just more of a weapons demonstration at this point. Because staying alive at those levels isn't anything anymore. You don't get one shot. Invisibility cheeses the entire thing. Like pick an invisibility frame with rolling guard and make sure you maximize your invisibility duration and manage your energy resources or manage your energy. Ta-da! There's your level cap survivability build. Now the weapon might be a different story, but it's just it's one of those things. It's frustrating at my point of view, but yeah. If somebody has some recommendations on how to treat weapons that have been power crept instead of just calling them trash, because keep in mind when you say that stuff, there are people. I get pissed about it, but there are people in this game that will see a build video and try to recreate it, and they will try to recreate it with plat. So they won't have prime continuity. They'll watch fill in the blank Warframe creator and go, "Oh, I have to have prime continuity," and they will go buy that. Now, I don't think anybody's being like manipulative enough to like tout weird weapons and show them in like their absolute best light. And then have like, it's like, oh, somebody comes out with a ridiculous build for the Stug, right? And that person has like 100 Stug ribbons. I don't think anybody's galaxy brained enough to do that sort of stuff. Though that would be hilarious. And I'd respect it, honestly. But the fact is there are people who don't know enough about the game and are just looking for good information, and they don't know yet to filter who they're listening to. So maybe just change how we talk about it. So, rant video over. This has been long enough. I've tried ending it a couple times, but I'm going to call it here. Thank you for listening, guys. Have a wonderful day. Have a blessed day. Stay excellent.